To understand the sheer scale of the nightmare my life became, you first have to understand what I do for a living. I am 29 years old, and I work as a senior cloud infrastructure architect for a multinational financial technology company. My job is not one where I can casually reply to an email every few hours while watching daytime television. I manage the digital backbone of a system that processes billions of dollars in transactions every single day. If a server goes down, or if a database misaligns during a migration, alarm bells ring across 3 different time zones, and millions of dollars can be lost in a matter of seconds. My daily routine consists of writing complex automation scripts, participating in high-stakes video conferences with executives, and monitoring the security of massive cloud networks. It requires absolute, unbroken, deafening silence and total concentration. Because of the intense nature of my work, I was granted a fully remote position. This allowed me to purchase a beautiful, spacious 4-bedroom home in a quiet, leafy suburban neighborhood. It was my sanctuary. I spent thousands of dollars soundproofing my home office, investing in ergonomic furniture, and setting up a multi-monitor workstation that looked like it belonged in a NASA control room. I loved my home, I loved my peace, and I loved my career. Unfortunately, my brother's wife, Brittany, fundamentally did not understand the concept of remote work. My brother, Mark, is a good guy, but he has always had the spine of a damp paper towel. 3 years ago, he married Brittany. Brittany is 32, proudly unemployed, and possesses an entitlement complex so massive it could generate its own gravitational pull. She sells overpriced essential oils on social media, a career that mostly involves posting highly filtered selfies with captions about being a boss babe and building an empire. In Brittany's mind, because I did not put on a stiff suit, commute an hour in rush hour traffic, and sit in a gray cubicle under fluorescent lights, I did not have a real job. To her, working from home was just a socially acceptable term for lounging around in sweatpants, watching Netflix, and occasionally clicking a mouse. She frequently made snide comments at family gatherings. "It must be so nice to just hang out at home all day," she would say, sipping her wine with a patronizing smirk. "I wish I had the luxury of doing nothing, but being a full-time mommy is the hardest job in the world." I usually just bit my tongue. I loved my brother, and I genuinely cared about their 3 children, 8-year-old Kinsley, 6-year-old Braden, and 4-year-old Hunter. The kids were energetic, to put it mildly. Under Brittany's complete lack of discipline, they were essentially feral. They communicated primarily through shrieks, viewed furniture as parkour equipment, and seemed to possess an unnatural ability to locate and destroy anything fragile or expensive. But I only saw them on holidays or scheduled weekend visits, so I endured the chaos with a polite smile. That all changed on a cold, dreary Tuesday morning in early October. It was exactly 6:58 a.m. I was in my kitchen, wearing my fleece bathrobe, waiting for the espresso machine to finish brewing. I had a massive day ahead of me. We were executing a critical, zero-downtime migration of a legacy database to a new cloud cluster, a project I had been leading for 6 months. I was mentally preparing for a grueling 10-hour sprint of coding, monitoring, and live troubleshooting. Suddenly, my doorbell rang, a sharp, piercing sound that shattered the quiet morning. I frowned, tightening my robe, and walked toward the front hallway. I checked the screen of my smart home hub linked to the front porch camera. Parked haphazardly in my driveway, blocking my own car, was Brittany's massive white SUV. On my porch stood Brittany, holding a massive iced coffee in one hand and scrolling on her phone with the other. Flanking her were Kinsley, Braden, and Hunter, all wearing backpacks and looking cranky. Confused, I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The biting morning air rushed in. "Brittany, what's going on? It's barely 7 in the morning," I said, rubbing my eyes. Before I could even process the situation, Brittany aggressively nudged the 3 children past me into my foyer. Hunter immediately threw his backpack onto my pristine hardwood floor, the heavy thud echoing through the house. Braden sprinted past him, heading straight for the living room, while Kinsley just stood there, glaring at me. "Hey, bestie," Brittany chirped, her voice dripping with toxic positivity. "I am in an absolute crisis." I have a massive opportunity today. A regional director for my wellness company is in town, and she invited me to an exclusive networking brunch. It's a total game changer for my business. I can't bring the monsters, and Mark is already at the site. My brother manages a construction crew and leaves the house at 5 a.m. Okay, I said slowly, trying to physically block the kids from advancing further into the house. But why are they here? You didn't even text me. Because family helps family, Maya, she said, rolling her eyes as if I were being entirely unreasonable. You're home anyway. You literally just sit on your computer all day. It won't kill you to keep an eye on them for a few hours. Just throw on a movie or something. They've had breakfast. I'll be back around 3. You're a lifesaver, love you. Wait, no, Brittany, stop, I yelled, stepping out onto the porch. But she was already moving with the speed of an Olympic sprinter. She hopped into her SUV, slammed the door, and locked it. She rolled down the window just enough to shout, "Don't forget, Hunter is allergic to strawberries." Bye. Tires squealed as she reversed out of my driveway, practically jumping the curb, and sped down the street. I stood on my porch in the freezing cold, my mouth hanging open in pure shock. I watched her taillights disappear around the corner. I was completely paralyzed. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. A loud, shattering crash from inside my house snapped me back to reality. I spun around and bolted inside. Braden had climbed onto the living room sofa and attempted to launch himself onto a decorative side table. The table had tipped over, sending a heavy ceramic lamp crashing to the floor. Shards of pottery were scattered across my rug. Kinsley was laughing, and Hunter was trying to pick up the broken pieces with his bare hands. "Stop, don't touch that," I screamed, rushing forward and scooping Hunter up under my arm. My heart was pounding against my ribs. It was 7:05 a.m. My first critical pre-deployment meeting was at 8 a.m. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and immediately dialed Brittany's number. It rang 3 times before going directly to voicemail. She had sent me straight to decline. I texted her, "Brittany, come back here right now. I am working. I cannot watch your kids." I watched the little delivery notification pop up. "Read at 7:06 a.m., she read it. She just didn't care. I tried calling Mark. Voicemail. His phone was always off while he was on active construction sites. I was entirely alone, trapped with 3 hyperactive children in a house not child-proofed, right at the onset of the most important workday of my career. The next 9 hours were a waking nightmare. I managed to sweep up the broken lamp and herd the children into the living room. I turned on the television, queued up a Disney movie, and practically begged them to stay on the couch. I grabbed 2 boxes of crackers and threw them onto the coffee table like a zookeeper feeding wild animals. I retreated to my office, leaving the door cracked open so I could hear them, and logged onto my workstation. At 8 a.m., my meeting began. My boss, the director of engineering, and 10 other senior developers were on the call. I was explaining the rollback procedures in case the migration failed. I had my headset on, my voice steady, trying to project absolute professionalism. So, if the primary node encounters a fatal error during the data sync, I was saying, sharing my screen to show the architecture diagram, we will immediately fail over to the secondary region. The latency should be minimal, but we need to ensure. Aunt Maya, Hunter peed Owen the rug. Braden's voice echoed down the hallway, loud enough to be picked up by my noise-canceling microphone. I froze. The entire video call went dead silent. Maya," my boss said, his brow furrowing. "Is everything all right over there? It sounds like you have a situation." "I am so sorry," I stammered, my face burning with hot, humiliating shame. "An unexpected family emergency. Just a moment." I muted my microphone, ripped off my headset, and sprinted into the living room. Sure enough, Hunter, who was supposed to be fully potty trained, was standing in the middle of my expensive Persian rug, a dark stain spreading around his feet. He looked at me and giggled. Kinsley was holding her nose, and Braden was jumping up and down. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. Instead, I frantically grabbed a roll of paper towels, threw them over the mess, scooped Hunter up, ran him to the bathroom, stripped off his wet clothes, and found a pair of oversized sweatpants from my guest room to put on him. I ran back to my desk, unmuted my microphone, and tried to resume my presentation, my hands literally shaking with stress. The rest of the day continued in this exact manner. Every time I managed to focus on a complex line of code, there was a scream, a fight, or a crash. By noon, Kinsley had somehow accessed my pantry and ripped open a bag of flour, dusting the kitchen floor in a white haze. Braden had used a crayon to draw a crude, jagged smiley face on the wall of the hallway. I missed 3 important Slack messages from my team because I was busy scrubbing crayon off the drywall with a magic eraser. At 1:30 p.m., during the actual live migration sequence, the most critical part of the day where my eyes needed to be glued to the server logs, the Wi-Fi suddenly dropped. My heart stopped. My screens flashed error messages. Connection lost. I panicked. I ran out of the office to check the router in the living room. Braden had pulled the power cord out of the wall because he wanted to plug in his tablet charger. I shoved him out of the way, practically screaming, plugged the router back in, and waited an agonizing 2 minutes for the network to reboot. By the time I reconnected to the VPN, the migration had hit a snag, and my team had been frantically trying to reach me. "Maya, where were you?" my boss demanded over the audio bridge, his voice tight with genuine anger. "We had a latency spike, and we couldn't proceed without your authorization. We almost had to abort the entire deployment. Hardware failure on my end. I apologize, I'm back," I lied, my voice shaking. Brittany finally showed up at 4:30 p.m., a full hour and a half later than she promised. She strolled into my house, completely oblivious to the state of exhaustion I was in. My hair was a mess, I had bags under my eyes, and my house looked like a bomb had gone off. "Hey, how were my little angels?" she asked, grabbing Hunter and kissing his cheek. "Brittany," I said, my voice dangerously low, "you can never, ever do this again. I nearly lost my job today. I am doing highly technical, critical work. I cannot babysit. If you ever leave them here again, there will be serious consequences." She scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh, calm down, drama queen. You're making a big deal out of nothing. You were just sitting at home. They're kids, they play. It's good for you to get off the computer anyway. You need to touch grass." Before I could unleash the torrent of rage building in my chest, she gathered the kids and left. I spent that evening cleaning pee out of my rug, scrubbing flour off my kitchen tile, and drafting a furious email to my brother. I explained exactly what happened. I told him Brittany was banned from my house during working hours. Mark replied a few hours later with a pathetic, spineless text. "Hey Maya, really sorry about today. Brit's just under a lot of stress with her new business venture. She didn't mean any harm. Family helps family, right? Just lock your office door next time, lol." I was enraged, but I assumed the boundary had been set. I assumed it was a one-time nightmare. I was wrong. The very next day, Wednesday, 7:00 a.m., the doorbell rang. I checked the camera. It was Brittany and the kids. This time, I didn't open the door. I stood in the hallway and watched through the peephole. Brittany pressed the bell again. When I didn't answer, she didn't leave. Instead, she knelt down, said something to the kids, and then walked back to her car. She got in and she drove away. She left them on my porch, a 4, 6, and 8-year-old, alone, outside, in the 40-degree autumn air. I watched in sheer horror as Braden started banging his fists against my front door, crying. Kinsley sat on the porch swing, looking miserable. Hunter was shivering. I had no choice. I couldn't leave them out there to freeze or wander into the street. Cursing every deity I could think of, I opened the door and dragged them inside. I called Brittany. Ignored. Texted. Ignored. Day 2 was worse than day 1. The kids were angrier, I was more stressed, and my boss requested a one-on-one video call at 3:00 p.m. "Maya," my boss said, his expression serious, "you're one of our best architects. But your performance over the last 2 days has been erratic. Background noise, missed cues, disappearing during the deployment. This isn't like you. We have the final phase of the rollout tomorrow and Friday. I need absolute focus. If you can't provide that, I'm going to have to pull you off the project, and we will have a formal review with HR regarding your remote work privileges." My blood ran cold. My remote work privileges were my life. If they forced me to commute to the downtown office, I'd lose 3 hours a day to traffic. I'd be miserable. Brittany was literally destroying my career. When she arrived at 5 p.m. to pick up the kids, I didn't yell. I was terrifyingly calm. "Brittany," I said, standing in the doorway, blocking her from entering. "I am telling you this clearly. Do not bring them back tomorrow. If you leave them on my porch again, I will call the police and report them abandoned." Brittany laughed in my face. It was a loud, mocking, ugly laugh. "You wouldn't dare call the cops on your own niece and nephews, Maya. You'd traumatize them. Mark would never forgive you, and neither would your parents. Stop bluffing. I have a 3-day wellness retreat starting tomorrow. It's virtual, but I need absolute focus. I'm dropping them off at 7. Make sure you have snacks." She turned and walked away. She was right. As much as I hated her, I couldn't call Child Protective Services. It would destroy my relationship with my brother and my parents. It would traumatize the kids, who were ultimately innocent in this. But I also couldn't lose my job. I was backed into a corner. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen island with a cup of black coffee and my laptop, researching my options. I looked up local daycare centers. They required weeks of registration and background checks, and I couldn't legally register children that weren't mine. I looked up standard babysitters on apps, but I needed someone who could handle 3 wildly undisciplined kids for 9 hours a day, starting tomorrow, without any onboarding. Then, at 2 a.m., I found it. Elite Guardian Nanny Services. It was a premium, boutique agency that specialized in emergency, high-profile, and crisis childcare. They provided fully licensed, bonded, CPR-certified professionals who often had backgrounds in early childhood education or behavioral psychology. They catered to celebrities, high-level executives, and wealthy families who needed immediate, top-tier care. Their website proudly advertised, "Available 24/7, no notice required. We handle the chaos so you don't have to." I clicked on the pricing tab. My jaw dropped. The base rate for one child was $80 an hour. For 3 children, under emergency same-day dispatch, the rate was $150 per hour. It was extortionate. It was absurd. It was exactly what I needed. A brilliant, vindictive, beautifully legal plan began to form in my mind. I am a meticulous person. I work with contracts, service-level agreements, and compliance logs all day. I knew that in contract law, there is a concept known as implied-in-fact contract, or quantum merit. If someone forces a service upon you, or creates a situation where you must incur a necessary cost to manage their property or dependents due to their abandonment, you can bill them for the reasonable costs incurred. I opened a new Word document and drafted a formal notice. It read, "To Brittany and Mark, last name, this constitutes formal written notice. I am unavailable to provide childcare for Kinsley, Braden, and Hunter. My home is a functional workspace. If you abandon your children at my property without my explicit prior consent, you are creating a crisis situation that jeopardizes my employment and the children's safety. Therefore, be advised. If your children are left at my home at any point, I will immediately secure emergency, professional, licensed childcare to supervise them on my premises while I fulfill my employment obligations. I will be acting as your agent out of necessity. You will be held 100% financially liable for all costs incurred by this professional service. The current market rate for emergency crisis childcare is $150.00 per hour. By leaving your children on my property after receiving this notice, you are actively consenting to these terms and agreeing to pay all associated invoices in full." I saved it as a PDF. At 3 a.m., I sent it to Brittany's email, Mark's email, and sent screenshots of the document to both of their phones via iMessage. At 6:30 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from Brittany. "Lol. Nice fake lawyer letter, Maya. You're so dramatic. See you at 7. She had read it. She had acknowledged it. She had mocked it. That was all the legal standing I needed. I immediately called the 24/7 hotline for Elite Guardian Nanny Services. A crisp, professional voice answered. I explained my situation. I had 3 children being dropped at my house in 30 minutes. I worked from home and needed absolute silence. I needed a professional who could take total control of the house, feed them, educate them, and keep them completely away from my office. We have a specialist available for immediate dispatch, the coordinator said. Her name is Mrs. Higgins. She specializes in behavioral management and high-energy siblings. Our emergency rate for 3 children is $150 per hour, plus a daily $50 dispatch fee. We require a credit card on file, and we bill weekly. Put it on my American Express, I said without hesitation. Send her immediately. At 6:55 a.m., a sleek black sedan pulled into my driveway. Out stepped Mrs. Higgins. She was a woman in her late 50s, wearing a sharp, tailored gray pantsuit. She carried a large canvas tote bag and had the stern, no-nonsense aura of an old-school British headmistress crossed with a military drill sergeant. I let her in, quickly explaining the layout of the house and the nature of the children. "Do not worry about a thing, Miss Maya," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice calm and authoritative. "Your home will be a sanctuary. You will not hear a peep. I will manage their meals, their schedule, and their behavior." At 7 a.m., Brittany's Tahoe rolled up. She did the exact same routine. Rushed to the porch, dumped the kids, didn't even wait for me to open the door, and sped off. I opened the door and ushered them in. Braden immediately opened his mouth to scream, winding up for a tantrum. Mrs. Higgins stepped forward. She didn't yell. She simply looked at him, clapped her hands twice, a sharp, piercing sound, and spoke in a tone that commanded absolute obedience. "Good morning, children. I am Mrs. Higgins. For the duration of the day, I am in charge. We will now proceed to the kitchen where you will wash your hands. Then, we will engage in quiet, structured reading time. Backpacks on the hooks, immediately." The children froze. They had never encountered a firm boundary in their entire lives. Mrs. Higgins' sheer presence was so overwhelming that Kinsley wordlessly hung up her backpack. Braden closed his mouth. Hunter just stared. Within 5 minutes, she had all 3 of them sitting at the kitchen table, silently working on age-appropriate puzzles she had pulled from her magical tote bag. I walked into my home office, closed the door, and logged onto my workstation. For the next 9 hours, I experienced absolute, blissful perfection. I didn't hear a single scream. I didn't hear a single crash. At noon, I emerged from my office to grab a water bottle. The house was spotless. Mrs. Higgins was leading the kids in a quiet, guided yoga session in the living room. She had prepared them a healthy lunch using ingredients she apparently brought herself. The children looked completely mesmerized, almost brainwashed by the structure and discipline. I went back to work. I nailed the final phase of the migration. My boss praised my focus. At 5 p.m., Brittany arrived. She waltzed through the front door, expecting the usual chaos. Instead, she found her 3 children sitting quietly on the couch, reading books. Mrs. Higgins was standing nearby, her hands clasped perfectly behind her back. Brittany stopped dead in her tracks, looking at Mrs. Higgins in confusion. Who are you?" "I am Mrs. Higgins, the emergency childcare specialist retained by Miss Maya," she replied smoothly. The children had a highly productive day. Their behavioral logs are on the kitchen counter. "Good evening." Mrs. Higgins nodded to me, picked up her bag, and left the house. Brittany turned to me, laughing nervously. "Wow, you actually hired a babysitter. You really are desperate not to do any actual work, aren't you?" "Well, thanks for the free childcare, Maya. See you tomorrow." "It's not free, Brittany," I said softly, leaning against the wall. "You received my notice. You are being billed for this." "Yeah, right," she scoffed, grabbing the kids. "Send me the bill, I'll put it on my tab." She thought I was joking. She thought it was a bluff to scare her. So she kept doing it. Every single weekday, for an entire month, Brittany dropped her kids off at my house at 7 a.m. And every single day, Mrs. Higgins was waiting. For 4 weeks, my life was glorious. My work performance skyrocketed. I was promoted to lead architect with a substantial salary increase, purely because the migration went flawlessly. I drank my morning coffee in peace. I never once had to deal with a tantrum, a spilled juice box, or a broken vase. Mrs. Higgins was a miracle worker. By week 2, the kids were actually looking forward to seeing her. They were calmer, more polite, and finally learning basic manners. But behind the scenes, the financial meter was running. 9 hours a day, $150 an hour. That was $1,350 per day. Plus the $50 daily dispatch fee. Total, $1,400 per day, 5 days a week. Total, $7,000 per week. I paid the invoices weekly with my high-limit credit card, keeping meticulous records. I saved every receipt from Elite Guardian nanny services. I exported the daily Ring camera footage showing Brittany abandoning the children at exactly 7 o'clock a.m. and picking them up at 5 o'clock p.m. I saved her sarcastic text messages acknowledging the arrangement. I kept Mrs. Higgins' daily logs. I built a legal fortress. After exactly 4 weeks, 20 working days, Brittany's virtual wellness retreat and networking phase apparently came to an end. She texted me on a Sunday night saying she was taking a break from her business to focus on self-care and would be keeping the kids at home starting Monday. The arrangement was over. It was time to collect. 20 days at $1,400 a day. The total cost came out to exactly $28,000. I sat at my computer and used professional accounting software to generate a highly detailed, itemized invoice. It had my name at the top, a unique invoice number, and line items for every single day of service, breaking down the hourly rate, the dispatch fees, and the exact times of drop-off and pickup. I attached a copy of the original notice of implied consent she had mocked. I set the payment terms to net 15, meaning she had 15 days to pay the balance in full before late fees accrued. That Sunday evening, my parents were hosting a family dinner. Mark, Brittany, and the kids were there. I arrived looking well-rested and wearing a sharp blazer. We sat around the dining room table, eating roast beef and making small talk. Brittany was bragging about how well her essential oil business was doing, claiming she was a top earner. "Speaking of business, Brittany," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. I slid it across the mahogany table. It stopped right next to her wine glass. "What's this?" she asked, picking it up. "That is the final invoice for the emergency childcare services you utilized over the past month," I said calmly, taking a sip of water. "I've paid the agency upfront to secure the service, as outlined in the contract I sent you on October 4th. You now owe me reimbursement. The total is $28,000. Payment is due in 15 days. The entire dining room went dead silent. My father stopped chewing. My mother's eyes widened. Mark looked like he had been slapped. Brittany ripped open the envelope and pulled out the thick stack of papers. She stared at the bold $28,000 and 0 cents printed at the bottom of the first page. For a second, she looked genuinely shocked. Then, the shock melted into extreme hysterical laughter. "Are you out of your mind?" she shrieked, slamming the papers onto the table. $28,000 for a babysitter? You're insane. I'm not paying a dime of this. You abandoned your children at my house every day, I replied evenly. I notified you in writing that doing so would result in the hiring of professional care at your expense. You mocked the notice and continued to drop them off. You entered into an implied contract. The rates are standard for elite emergency care. The documentation is all there. Mark finally found his voice. "Maya, come on. This is a joke, right? 28 grand? We don't have that kind of money. We're trying to close on a house next month." Yes, the house. Mark and Brittany had been trying to move out of their cramped starter home for years. They had recently gone into escrow on a gorgeous $750,000 new build in a highly coveted school district. They had been scraping together the down payment and were right in the middle of the underwriting process for their mortgage. "It's not a joke, Mark," I said, locking eyes with my brother. "She nearly cost me my job. She ignored my calls. She ignored my boundaries. I took the necessary steps to protect my livelihood and ensure your children were safe. I expect to be paid." "You're a sick, greedy bitch," Brittany screamed, standing up so fast her chair tipped over. "I'm your family. You don't charge family. I am never paying this. You can take this fake invoice and shove it." She grabbed her purse, ordered the kids to get their coats, and stormed out of my parents' house. Mark lingered for a moment, looking miserable, before mumbling an apology to our parents and following her. My parents tried to intervene, begging me to let it go. "She learned her lesson, Maya," my dad pleaded. "Don't ruin the family over money." "It's not about money, Dad," I said quietly. "It's about respect. And consequences." I waited exactly 15 days. Not a single cent was transferred to my account. I didn't receive an apology or even a text asking for a payment plan. Instead, Brittany posted several passive-aggressive quotes on her Facebook page about toxic family members and cutting out negativity. On day 16, I executed the next phase of the plan. Because the amount owed was $28,000, it vastly exceeded the limits of small claims court in my state, which maxed out at $10,000. This meant I couldn't just file a simple form and argue it out before a magistrate. I had to file a formal civil lawsuit in the county circuit court. I didn't hire a lawyer to represent me in court, but I did pay a contract attorney $500 to draft the formal complaint. We sued Brittany and Mark, as her spouse and the legal co-guardian of the children, for breach of implied contract, quantum merit, and unjust enrichment. I hired a private process server, a burly man named Dave. I gave Dave a $50 tip to serve Brittany the summons while she was hosting one of her essential oil wellness parties at her house. According to the Ring camera footage Dave happily shared with me later, he walked right into her living room, past 5 of her friends, handed her the thick stack of legal documents, loudly declared, "You've been served," and walked out. The lawsuit demanded the $28,000 principal, plus court filing fees, plus the legal fees for drafting the complaint. Here is the thing about people like Brittany: their arrogance is their ultimate downfall. Brittany truly believed that the law did not apply to her. She thought that because we were family, a judge would laugh me out of court. She thought it was just more fake lawyer stuff designed to scare her. So, she did the absolute worst thing you can possibly do when you are sued in civil court. She ignored it. She didn't file an answer with the court within the mandatory 21-day period. She didn't hire a lawyer. She didn't even show up to the initial scheduling hearing. Mark later claimed she hid the documents from him, telling him she had handled it. Because she failed to respond, I immediately filed a motion for default judgment. The hearing for the default judgment was brief. I stood before a stern-faced county judge wearing a conservative navy suit. I presented my meticulously organized binder. I showed him the initial warning notice. I showed him the Ring camera screenshots of the abandonment. I showed him the receipts from the nanny agency, proving I had actually been financially damaged to the tune of $28,000. I showed him the text messages of Brittany mocking the arrangement. The judge flipped through the binder, his eyebrows raising higher and higher. He looked at the empty defendant's table. "The defendant was properly served?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor. Affidavit of service is in tab 4, I replied. The judge shook his head. "The audacity to leave young children unattended on a porch? Miss, last name, you acted prudently to secure care. The evidence of an implied-in-fact contract is overwhelming, and frankly, the defendant's failure to appear speaks volumes." He banged his gavel. Default judgment granted in favor of the plaintiff in the amount of $28,750 to include filing fees. I walked out of that courthouse with a signed, stamped court order declaring that my sister-in-law owed me almost $30,000. But a judgment is just a piece of paper. You still have to collect the money. I knew Brittany didn't have 28 grand sitting in a checking account, but I also knew exactly what she and Mark were doing. They were buying a house. In my state, once you have a civil judgment, you can record it with the county recorder's office. The moment you do that, it becomes a public lien against the debtor. Furthermore, the judgment is immediately reported to the 3 major credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. I paid the $35 fee to record the judgment. I then filed a writ of garnishment against Brittany's bank accounts, freezing whatever little money she made from her pyramid scheme, just to twist the knife. The explosion happened 3 days later. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was wrapping up a code review when my phone started vibrating violently off my desk. It was Mark. He was calling back to back to back. I took a deep breath, clicked accept, and put it on speakerphone. "Maya, what the hell did you do?" Mark was not just yelling, he sounded like he was hyperventilating. He was practically sobbing. "Hello, Mark. I'm doing well, thanks for asking," I said calmly. "The mortgage, the house, we were supposed to close on Tuesday, Maya." "Tuesday?" he screamed, his voice cracking. The underwriter did their final soft credit pull this morning before issuing the clear to close. They found a $30,000 public judgment on Brittany's credit report. Her score tanked by over 100 points overnight. The bank pulled the loan. They denied the mortgage. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, looking out the window at my quiet, peaceful street. "That is unfortunate, Mark," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Perhaps Brittany should have paid her bills, or, at the very least, shown up to court to defend herself. "Court? What court?" "She told me you dropped the whole thing. She told me you guys made up." Mark was crying now. "Maya, please, we lose our earnest money deposit. We have to move out of our rental at the end of the month. We have nowhere to go. You have to vacate the judgment. Please call the court, tell them it was a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake, Mark. She used $28,000 of my money to fund her month of leisure. She nearly got me fired." She laughed in my face. "The judgment